Do I need to see the evidence? I believe we're on. And I'm just going to start. Hi, my name is Jane Frizzell. This is basic military riding. Gustav Steinbrecht was not in the military, but a very renowned cavalry guy, Colonel Hans von Heidebrecht was, and he is who wrote the prologue and epilogue in GYMNASIUM, which is sometimes called the Bible of horse riding, of horse training. And, I'm going to just tell you one thing that von Heidebrecht said about the doctrine, ride your horse forward and set it straight, which isn't Steinbrecht. Steinbrecht just expounded on it. Those are the two golden rules of riding. That's like the DNA, or it's the truth of riding. And von Heidebrecht said that if we don't follow those two rules, that it's blasphemy against the Holy Spirit of riding. So none of us want to do that. Where did we leave off last week? I was really talking about straightness, the way that he explains straightness. We're in pages 72 and 73 in the section Ride Your Horse Forward and Set It Straight. And he's been talking about the spine. He's been talking about what defines straightness. And those two main things, what defines straightness is that the horse's hind footprints track into the front footprints, right hind to right front, left hind to left front, and the spine is the line. The horse becomes the line. The spine is over the line. And the reason for that is that the direction that he calls the spine of the horse the main stem of the horse, and he says that the direction of the main stem therefore also primarily determines the activity of the individual limbs during movement. So there is to work it correctly, namely to make it flexible, is one of the main tasks of a trainer. So then my question, and I do not have this difficulty, what's up with all the kissing spines? It's not from the breeding. It's from not riding horses forward straight. And that spine has to be distributed and arranged upon the line of travel. And then there's so many things preventing that these days, namely that people don't have a line of travel. You've got to have a line of travel. One of the contests I've run in the past is for students, riders, trainers to go through this section, these main training sections about the body in GYMNASIUM, and note, write down or underline or highlight every time he mentioned straight lines and curved lines. You must have them. You just absolutely must have them, because we can't gymnasticize a horse without it. I can't arrange his body if the direction that he's moving isn't determined, hopefully by me. Okay. Now, this is very obvious. We've already talked about this. The rider should not try to put the load on the hindquarters primarily with his hands. Through forward driving aids, he must cause the hindquarters, the hind legs, to step more underneath the weight and thus take on the load themselves. He is saying this in a very particular way because for the definition of forward, as we've already read and accepted, is that the horse's the forward element, the forward quality in a correct way of going is the horse's own desire to advance the load. So this corresponds exactly here that the horse must step more underneath the weight to take on the load himself or themselves. If you're talking about a number of horses, they take on the load themselves. They must do that. And when we're talking about submission and forcing horses to do things, you cannot force a horse to do that. You cannot force a horse to desire to carry himself and advance the load forward. You can't force them to do that. You can force them to run, but you can't force them to have self-carriage. Now you could trick them into it for like maybe a corner, for like maybe you could go 15 meters, but if the quality of forward includes the horse's own desire, it just can't be forced. So I think that's very comforting in a way. Like, we train horses to carry themselves. Okay. The hands of the rider either rest passively, preventing the horse from rushing, which is what they do when they shirk their responsibility of carrying the weight, or the hand must act to move the load even more decisively backward in order to load the moving hind legs more. Now, if you want to think about this, this would be, for example, if I'm trotting along on a line and I sit him down and I displace his forehand to the inside, the left side in this case, in order to load the left hindquarter more. That's what he's talking about here. To move the load even more decisively rearward in order to bend the forward moving hindquarters even more. I think, look around page 132 or 134 of Podolsky. He has about 5 things he lists as the purpose of shoulder in, but the very first one is that the weight of the forehand is going to flex or bend that big inside hindquarter joint more. That's why we do it. That's what he's talking about here. So he's not talking about, oh, I will lift the horse and dump the weight backward like a dump truck. Now we could do that for like a stride, but it's more decisively and precise. Like, I am going to test and exercise the left hindquarter by adding, you're adding a weight on the barbells at the gym. Let's add a weight for 6 steps onto his left hindquarter. Oh, he goes, yep. But he accepts it and does it, and that hindquarter flexes a little more. So then I straighten him. He dances out better because the hindquarter is more engaged because it accepted weight. None of this works if the horses don't accept the weight. And you can lift a hand or lift the forehand as much as you want, but if it isn't accepted by the hindquarter joints, accepting by flexion that added weight, you didn't do anything. You didn't do anything useful. This is very important. This is what the people that claim French but forgot section 34. You see what I mean? Like, getting the neck up and the forehand up, they just get the neck up. They don't get the forehand up. But we decisively, we make a decision. I am going to load that hindquarter with the weight of the forehand for 6 steps or 16 meters. That's the longest time a shoulder in is ever asked for in an FEI test. It's an intermediate 2. I think the intermediate 2. It might be the intermediate. Okay. Now, and also really important here, she says that I might displace the forehand decisively, deliberately backward in order to bend the forward moving hindquarters even more. Like, I might make that choice. Now, the elevation of the forehand, because I've set weight back, comes automatically the more the hindquarters are lowered and bent by weight bearing. The hindquarters are bent, which lowers them by weight bearing. When this happens, no matter the cause, whether it's from my harassing little spurs going, come on, or whether it's because I displaced the forehand for a determined distance in order to do this, the more load the hindquarters take, wait, I don't know which is which. This is going to be hindquarters. Hindquarters, the withers will come up. If the croup is being lowered by weight because of the flexion of the coxofemoral joints, especially, and the butt, the withers will come up, not the pole. The withers come up. The withers should come up, not the pole. Now the pole will come up too because it's attached, but unless it's wrecked, but the forehand comes. Now what this is called relative elevation, die Aufrichtung. I'll put it in the description. And there's a separate podcast thing that's going to come out about the Aufrichtung, because it's a very important idea. And it means relative elevation. It means that the forehand comes up. I'm going to read it. The elevation of the forehand then comes automatically relative to the lowering and bending of the hindquarters by weight. Okay, that's what relative elevation is. The Germans call it the Aufrichtung. Now, it used to be the key. It used to be a huge primary part of their training scale. And it got left out in some printing error in, like, I think the mid 90s, if I recall right. I mean, my God, that is a huge problem there. The Aufrichtung. We'll talk about that more. Okay, now, but this is important. The elevation of the forehand comes automatically. I never say, oh, horsey, I'm going to teach you to have a lighter forehand. Now, I do teach my horse to follow the reins, stay in front of your outer rein. I unite the forehand. I make it lickety split. I make him follow it. And guess what? He lightens his own forehand because he's like, oh shit, I got to follow the bit. That's the rule. You know, he agrees to that. He agreed to that when he learned an opening rein when he was 3.5. Oh, I follow the bit. Oh, he just gets quicker at it. But what I'm getting at is I never say, oh, I'm going to lighten my horse's forehand. I train him to go forward. I train him to stay in front of my leg and to carry me. And I train his forehand to be displaceable. And I get it, the quicker, the more united and the quicker displaceable I get his forehand, he lightens it. I don't lighten it. He lightens it. This is so important. I really want you guys to hear what I'm saying, is that a trained horse does it. I don't mechanically do it or cause it every time. A well-trained horse, he starts already kind of going the right way. It's not like every time I do a flying change, I have to straighten him. Like, what the? No, my horse is already going forward and he's straight. So my change should, and if he's obedient to my aids, the change should be ready. I don't have to straighten him more to make a change if my horse already goes straight. Do you guys see this distinction I'm making? This is $1 million riding lesson I'm telling you right here. You've got to start thinking like horse trainers instead of, I don't even know what to call them, horse people. I don't know. We train the horses to do it. And the trained horse goes forward, self-carries, and he's set straight. I don't have to straighten him. It's not like this huge ordeal every day. I might have to go, oh, my darling, don't forget, you have a little tendency to drift right. And he goes, oh, shit, okay, well, I forgot, I'll go. You know, we tune it every day because it's an athletic endeavor, and we're like his coach or his little training partner. But you don't have to re-straighten them all the time. And you don't have to lift their forehand for them. You can't. Okay. I hope I made that understood. It's self-desire. They take on the load themselves. acquire their own desire. That is the decision they make in submission. They decide, you know what, I think I understand what she's asking, and it's a little bit of effort, but I don't hate it. I think I'm going to do as I think I'm going to follow these ideas. That's a submitted horse. Okay. This rule, the Aufrichtung, I don't know if my German might not be so great, but so the elevation of the forehand, the relative elevation of the forehand, relative that it comes automatically the more the hindquarters are lowered and bent by weight bearing. This rule is often disregarded. You know where we are on the page now, following along, particularly by riders who, because their body is too stiff, have dead legs. Dead legs. You hear that? This isn't me being mean. Have dead legs and therefore always tend to overcome this drawback, the drawback being their dead legs, by increased activity of their hands. Since under such riders, the insufficiently stimulated hind legs, hindquarters, don't step far enough underneath the load to be truly bent by it, the activity of their hands is unsuccessful. They merely interfere with their horse's movement and thus deprive themselves of the only means for attaining the desired goal. The only means of attaining the desired goal is causing the hind legs to follow straight forward and go underneath the weight on their own. What time is it? So I'm going to a little bit shift here. There are so many of these riders with dead legs and busy hands. Instead, I have a little bit hyperactive pestering legs at the beginning, especially. I'm like, what the hell? You better get going. And then they do. But my hands, they're just there to regulate rein length, remind to keep the jaw loose and soft. Okay. And occasionally to indicate a direction with one of the rein actions, usually one of the first three rein actions. It's usually just a little inner rein. If my horse, well, I'm not going to get into that. Okay. So you don't want to have stiff, dead legs, but most riders have stiff, dead legs. Most horse people have stiff, dead legs. The hindquarters are insufficiently stimulated and they get neuropathy. I think that's the right word. This is the horse that you can go up to it and it's just so asleep in its butt that you can tap its cannon bone. I can't really, and nothing happens. They don't even feel it. Insufficiently stimulated hind legs and hindquarters. Insufficiently stimulated. They need to be stimulated. They need to be awake. They need to be attentive, and they are taught the desire to carry. The hindquarters are. Okay, now I was going to go off on a little bit of a different topic, and I'm now going to do that. So today, I don't ever share anything new because there's really nothing new in riding to share. Okay. And I've written most of it down. And the last few years that I was on Facebook, it was just during the time that I was assembling this program, which is now assembled enough for people to operate in it. It's not all the way done, but it's pretty good, which is why my Facebook output is greatly curtailed the last 6 months. And I'm usually only resharing crap I wrote a couple of years ago, which you guys all need to hear again, and new people need to hear for the first time. The hashtag I'm using is no new content, hashtag no new content, or hashtag no new content 2024 or 2025. so that people can just search for it, because really that there is a lot of new content all the time about training horses is why there's such gigantic problems with training horses. There is no new content. If you can't find it in this or in this, don't do it. Or in Somor too. These plus Somor, you don't, it's not in there, you shouldn't be doing it. So that's just not that much. All those three books combined is not 1,000 pages like Dive School, which is 991 pages. Those three combined, if we boiled it all down, it comes to maybe 80 pages because they're so redundant to each other. And you want to be happy that they're redundant to each other. Okay, now back to my topic, what I was going to bring up. So I just reshare the same old stuff all the time. And I don't care if you like it or not. It's the right way to do this. And what I shared today is an old favorite. Don't wear your spurs in Publix. So if you want to read that, maybe I'll put it in the description. And spurs is, and why am I bringing this up? So the insufficiently stimulated hind leg and how and hind quarter and riders with dead legs. This is not to make people abusive or rough with the spur. It's about what is the spur for. A couple things about spurs. Spurs are earned. Spurs are earned, and we do not wear spurs unless we're sitting on a horse. That means you take them off when you dismount. And it is it's a little bit, it's sort of like a show of force to wear spurs. So you shouldn't wear spurs. And you shouldn't wear spurs walking around the barn. You especially shouldn't wear them lunging. So it is a good habit to take your spurs off when you dismount. And yes, it is a pain in the ass if you then are going to get on another horse. Take them off. Do each step. Do these rules and protocols because they make you disciplined. The convenience of everything, oh, it's inconvenient for me to do that. Do it. It shows up. It shows up in the riding. What you'll learn is I'm going to roll up my stirrups. I'm rolling them up. I am removing my gloves so I can remove my spurs. I am putting them in my little bag or putting them on this little place right here. If there's another horse to ride, I will put my spurs back on. What you'll learn is taking the time to do these things properly and in order buys you time, and it makes you a much more orderly rider and trainer. So a lot of the rules, yeah, they are kind of hazing, and you could get away with not doing them, but not at the tippy top. Not if you really want to do well. You can't get away with it because the rules train you, they teach you. So don't wear your spurs in Publix. And what I'm going to tie in right now, and if you would like to, you can go ahead and read page 75 because he talks about the horse's obedience and respect of the spurs. But what I want, he has taught this, he's taught their meaning and what their meaning is, what this is important of why do we wear spurs. It's not exactly to make him go forward. My spurs will stimulate a lazy horse, but they're not saying you're lazy. My spur I'm going to read what he says instead of remembering it. My spurs tell the horse to take on and maintain a body position like a bend that is connected with effort. So they're like, this is hard. I say, I don't care. My spur says, I don't care, my darling. You can do it. I have confidence in you. The horse's obedience to the spurs is to get the horse to do the thing, even though it's effort, because then he gets stronger and more confident, and to get the hindquarters to act uniformly in mechanics, power, and attentiveness. You know, one of them, usually one of the hindquarters is a little deaf. That's what I mean. And the other thing that my spurs do is strictly supervise the tracks of the footfalls. So now we're right back at this following alone determines the way of going, because the thrust of the hindquarters becomes more effective the straighter it acts against the body mass. This following alone. So my spurs strict are what is the word he uses? My spurs get the hind legs to act uniformly, and they strictly supervise their tracks. Right hind to right front, left hind to right front, no matter if the line is a 90-degree turn or a straight line or any degree in between. So these are so the spurs are not wicked or mean. They are very specific what they do, which is why they're small. They don't need to be, they don't clobber him. Like, they're pestery. They're like, oh, don't forget. Oh my God, you just went 1/10 of a centimeter wide, my darling. If you do that, it could be a catastrophe in 6 months. Please, my darling, stay on the line. That's what my right spur says when I'm tracking left at the girth. Isn't that what yours says?